Seventh Planet Broadcasting, Headlines with a Brain, with your host, Gerald Clark.
Welcome to Headlines with a Brain. Today's topic is Earth's magnetic pole is shifting rapidly. Why? On August 28, 2019, I'll be your host, Gerald Clark. It's kind of a heavy topic today, but let's see if we can make some sense of it. And many have been exposed to the fact that the Earth's magnetic pole is moving at a rapid rate from its past location in Canada towards Siberia at this current time. We can compare and contrast the material composition of each location which would attract the pole, but that's not really important for this story. Why is this happening? Here are some evidence points to consider as they relate to a changing magnetic pole location and possible polarity. Evidence supporting cataclysm cycles. Number one, magnetite we found is solidified with opposite charge poles all over the Earth, so we can see that happens. Number two, the Mayan calendar, August 11th, 3014 was its start date for the long count. And what was it counting down to? It counts down to entering the galactic equator, which happened about 2011. We'll go over that. Number three, in the book Holy Science, Babaji instructs Swami Yugasar as to the relationship of the Yuga cycles and human consciousness, which also exposes these cycles. Number four, we'll get a little more scientific. Doug Voigt at the Diehold Foundation gave us some great evidence for the past 7 solar micronovas that he says happens about every 12,068 years. And then the last one, if you want to read a more, fancified version of what could happen when this happens, this book called Adam and Eve that was CIA classified, ended up declassified with a bunch of material stripped out of it that you can download online and still read the majority of the story in it, okay? So what I'm going to do is go through each item, starting with item 1 above. Scientists have reported that evidence of magnetite shows that the Earth's dynamo, positive and negative poles, switch locations. To be clear, that means the Earth stays on the same orbital axis approximately, but something happens that causes the magnetic dynamo to reverse directions, exchanging north and south poles as itemized in the evidence that points to a periodic cataclysm. I want to clarify something about electricity and magnetism. The only way the dynamo can change locations is if the spin of the Earth reverses, okay? This is due to the nature of the relationship electricity has with magnetism. We call this the right-hand rule for you electrical engineering nerds out there. Essentially, if one points their thumb in the direction of the electron current flow, like along a wire or along the axis of the Earth, using your right hand and rotate your fingers inward, okay, that indicates the magnetic flux field orientation. This is due to the relationship of electricity with magnetism, okay? This means that if the electrical current conducted through the Earth's core heading to a northern pole, the magnetic flux will circulate around the Earth clockwise, looking from the top towards the thumb. Here's an article that discusses this topic in more detail. Okay, so let's go take a look at that article real quick. Okay, it's written by some scientists. It's pretty good. I'll have to blow this up so you can see it. It's hard to read. Okay, but anyway, they're asking the question, is the Earth's magnetic pole due to a reversal? And they actually describe some of the evidence, including the magnetic flux and the magnetite. Okay, so they talk about all that in here if you want to read about that. I want to clarify that a dynamo means the north and south magnetic poles. Okay, let's go back and get busy here, okay? Thus, the statements made about the Earth reversing directions in order to change the magnetic poles should be clarified. That's not to say that disruptive events can and have in the past changed the Earth's orbital axis, which rotates at about approximately 24 degrees. The real question is what could cause the Earth's rotation to be reversed, and could it really happen? Because if it does, the oceans will be launched out of their basins and cover all the land masses in short order. Then reverse direction and do it again. That's really something to look forward to. What we're sneaking up on is the idea that has been batted about in the scientific community for a very long time. This goes back to Einstein, Hapgood, and several other ones. And that is cyclic cataclysms, like the great biblical deluge that wiped out all life on the surface of the Earth. For instance, This story appears in many cultures, including the Egyptian records, indicating there have been 4 major floods and several minor ones. The goal here is not to chase down which flood affected the city of Shuruppak and its king Atrahasis Ziusudra Noah, but rather ask the question, if it happened before, will it happen again? If so, when? I've taken the liberty of organizing some key evidence that points to a clear case that our sun and its satellites get perturbed every 12,000 years or so. I'll cover each reference briefly and give you the key points, and then correlate the factual evidence and use it to formulate a clear picture of the situation regarding our current solar system changes. In item 2, the Mayans, led by the genius Quetzalcoatl Thoth, disclosed a countdown calendar, the Tzolk'in calendar, that began August 11, 3014. What event were they counting down to? Each Mayan sun cycle lasts 13 baktuns, or 5,125 years. Subtracting the start date of their calendar, 3014 BC, which is in the Mayan sun cycle of 5,125 years, we land in the year 2011. Okay, that's why everybody was all spun up about this 2012 business. Contrary to the 2012 crowd, Ian Lungold, a Mayan researcher, disclosed that this date, I think his came out October 2011, before he died. Either way, the event the Mayans were counting down to was represented in the ball game made famous by them. The high lateral hoop represents the galactic equator, and the rubber ball represents the sun and its satellites, like the Earth, transiting the dark rift. So when the ball went through the hoop, it was basically an indication that the solar system was at the galactic equator. Okay, so based on the Mayan calendar, the long count was pointing to the fact the sun rises in the dark rift, that's the galactic equator, when our solar system sinusoidally transits the galactic equator, as others have disclosed in the later evidence as well. Could this be why the earthquakes and volcanoes and crazy weather are happening now and have increased since about 2011? You can see the charts. The gas and debris located at the galactic equator greatly affects our sun and its satellites like pouring gas on a burning fire, literally. This changes the solar dynamo and the dynamo of the satellites. They are correlated, whether you like to believe it or not. Without getting into excess detail, just know that each time the sun passes through the galactic equator, here on the Orion arm of the Milky Way galaxy, undulating up and down sinusoidally every 25,920 years, if you divide that by 2 or so, all the surface life is destroyed every 12 to 13,000 years by repeating cataclysms, unless they survive in a deep underground military base or leave for a while like the Anunnaki did to other planets, then return. This is the real reason for climate change, and all else is a red herring. Let's take a look at the Mayan calendar for a moment. Okay, where's it at? All right, let's go see the Mayan calendar. And I'm not going to go over this in excessive detail for you, but the part that's very important is to get in your head what the long count was, when it started, and what the date it pointed down to. So you can do the math here and figure out that it pointed to 2011, not 2012, but it was close enough. Here's your start date, August 11th, 3014 in the Gregorian calendar, and September 6th, 3014, August, September, what's the big deal? It's still the 3014 in the Julian calendar, okay? So, and then we calculated 5,125.36 years for a Mayan sun cycle right here, and then you just do the subtraction, okay, right there, and that'll land you in 2011. Okay, let's go back, and actually there's some good stuff in this document, but there's a lot more detailed ones out there as well. There's a lot of work that's been done by the Mayan calendar enthusiasts. Now let's go to item 3. Most of you probably have not nor ever will read this kind of literature, like the book Holy Science by Swami Yukteswar. Anyway, in that book, the Yuga cycles are described, which in essence shows that every 12,000 years our solar system transits the galactic equator, affecting the state of human consciousness. Isn't that interesting? A correlation between the energy in the galactic equator and human consciousness. Because in the Tzolk'in calendar, the Mayans said we'd reach universal consciousness when we got to that place. Is that happening now? A rising and falling cycle based on the energy present at the galactic equator. In the model, the transit time of the galactic center, therefore, subtracting from a great year, which is 25,920 years, we have 12,000 years in the ascending Yuga, 12,000 years in the descending Yuga cycle, and the 25,000 25,920, whoops, 920 years minus 24,000 years, that leaves 1,920 years in the middle of the equatorial debris and gas and radiation, folks, where no life can survive on the surface of our planet. If we assume the magnetic field has been decimated and our sun reaches a hotter state or quanta during that time. And I've got a diagram from Swami Yuga Cycle with a short paragraph from his book that I want to show you. Okay, so I think it's right here. And this is on page 12, I guess. All right, right about here. And I'll show you the front cover of this. You can download this book, by the way, as a PDF. After 12, okay. The autumnal equinox will be falling at the beginning of the 20th century among the fixed stars of the Virgo constellation in the early part of the ascending Dwapara Yuga. After 12,000 years, when the sun goes to the place in its orbit which is farthest from Brahma, the grand center, this is the galactic center, an event which takes place when the autumnal equinox is on the first point of Libra, which they call Dharma. The mental virtue comes to such a reduced state that a man cannot grasp anything beyond the gross material creation. Again, in the same manner, when the sun in its course of revolution begins to advance toward the place nearest the grand center, Dharma, the mental virtue begins to develop. This grows and gradually completed in another 12,000 years. In other words, if you're heading toward the galactic center or galactic equator, human consciousness increases. If you're moving away, it decreases. So we go from barbarians living in caves when we're a long ways from the galactic equator to universal consciousness when we enter it, in summary. Each of these periods of 12,000 years brings a complete change, both externally in the material world and internally in the intellectual or electric world, and is called one of the Daiva Yugas, or electric couple. Thus, in a period of 24,000 years, the sun completes the revolution around its dual and finishes. He's talking about the dual, meaning its binary twin, and finishes one electric cycle consisting of 12,000 years in an ascending arc and 12,000 years in a descending arc. Okay, that's what they're showing here in this diagram. What they leave out is the great year is 25,920 years, and when you're in the middle, you're exposed for that period of time until you come out the other side. Okay, he doesn't describe that. That's probably enough of that. Let's go back to the document and see if we can get oriented again. So, in evidence item 4, we find the scientific data, some of the most convincing, coming from the nonprofit foundation, the Diehold Foundation, and their researcher, Doug Vogt. I really like Doug, he's a real scientist. Their findings indicate that 7 distinct evidentiary layers were found and verified by the military-industrial complex that point to solar eruptions called a micronova every, what he believes, 12,068 years. This is very close to the 12,000 years Swami Yuga Cycle wrote about in the 1890s, okay? I checked the tabular data from Doug, and only 5 of the 7 data points were significant. The other 2 seem to be in error, inaccurate. So I'm kind of clarifying their research, which they failed to correlate to the Mayan sun cycles, or he never even discussed, indicating that the cause for the solar micronova in the first place. What causes the micronova? He just found the periodicity. The sun explodes partially, micronovas, each time it passes through the galactic equator. This is my take on it. Doug didn't say this. Destroying all life on the surface of the Earth and causing a pole shift with global flooding, earthquakes, and volcanoes activated, and an ice age too. Okay, the sun's energy quanta changes as it's exposed to this equatorial debris and the gas which acts as external solar fuel. This energy state change of the sun alters its magnetic polarity machine, state, or dynamo, that's what we call it, which in turn affects its satellites' dynamos, including that of the Earth. Here's a table shown by Doug supporting his findings for his cyclical cataclysm data. And by the way, he's got a bunch of good videos on YouTube put up by the foundation that for those of you who are patient enough to go through it, he lays it all out. I'm just giving you the summary here. So let's see what he's got. I believe I got a YouTube thing to show this. Okay, so here somebody did an article on this solar micronova, and based on his 12,068 year data, that if you go back and find the last one that occurred, he believes it was 10,022 BC. The next one will happen in 2046, okay? So here's his summary right here, okay? October 10th, 2416. Okay. And they give credit to Doug here and talk about the article. Excuse me. Actually, Suspicious Observer did a nice video summarizing Doug's work and including his own with it. So those are two of the people that I respect for actually still telling the truth about what's going on here. This is the link to Suspicious Observer's video. So anyway, it goes through and it talks about several of the evidence from the past, Carrington event, blah, 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 and basically doesn't really say yay or nay, but goes across a lot of the evidence for you to consider if you want to. So I'll leave that link in the article for you. Okay. Oh, actually, one other thing we want to look at while we're up here. Doug had a table that I pulled up. Here it is. So here's Doug presenting evidence of his clock cycles of the universe. Here's 7. He had 6 of them. I thought he had 7 in another table. Notice the first one here kind of made an error. He used it as a reference point for the next one. But this one right here was kind of off as well. So what he was looking for is this number, the 12,068 periodicity, that seems to be related to this universal clock cycle that's affecting our sun. Okay, so good job to Doug for pulling that together. Okay, so you can look in his work. I encourage that. Diehold Foundation. Okay, let's face it, folks. Only a very large intruder planet like Nibiru or our sun could cause a dynamo change on the Earth, not your car's exhaust. This is due to the fact that the solar winds carrying the electromagnetic energy are responsible for the Earth's dynamo in the first place. This is the radiation in the solar winds striking the spherical resonator we call our Earth. Thus the sun and our Earth dynamo are coupled to a set of very predictable clock cycles, which the Diehold scientist points out as well. The only real question left to ask is how accurate is this 12,068 year estimate for the event, and when was the last one, so we can project forward in time as a prediction for the next solar micronova. Doug did that and has predicted that the next solar micronova happens in October of 2046. This is based on his belief that the cycle is 12,068 years long and that it happened in 10,022 BC. 10,022 BC. I don't know how exact you can be with this date. I'll have to look into how he came up with that exactly. If we accept the last date given as 10,022 BC and use the 12,000 year date given by evidence points 2 and 3 above, we find that our next micronova would happen in 1978, which we did not see. Thus, if we average the cycle periods of 12,000 years supplied by the gurus of the past and 12,068 years from the scientists, divide that by 2, just average them, we can give partial credit to both. In this case, instead of 68 years over the 12,000 cycle, we use 34. Now subtract that from 2046 and you get 2012. Since that year somewhat coincides with the Mayan calendar long count date specifying about the same time, that means that a solar micronova is expected by the world's governments and leaders any time now, okay? Could that be why we're seeing legislation that happened in March 2019 in the United States that announced a new initiative to protect the electrical grid from an EMP? Now let's face it, they've known about missiles that could be launched into the upper atmosphere, blown up, causing an EMP for a very long time and never passed into legislation, okay? And it just happened this year. A solar micronova produces massive electromagnetic pulses, far more devastating than a telegraph wire sizzling Carrington event at the turn of the century, okay? The government calls them geomagnetic disturbances. Here's a definition from their new legislation. We can look at the link together for a moment. Okay. Item B, electromagnetic pulse is a burst of electromagnetic energy. EMPs have the potential to negatively affect technology systems on the Earth and in space. A high-altitude EMP is a type of human-made EMP that occurs when a nuclear device is detonated approximately 40 kilometers or more above the surface of the Earth. Thanks for telling all our enemies how high to do it. A geomagnetic disturbance, GMD, is a type of natural EMP driven by a temporary disturbance of the Earth's magnetic field resulting from interactions with solar eruptions. Both high altitude EMPs and geomagnetic disturbances can affect large geographic areas. How about the whole planet? Okay, let's go see if we got a link to this little article from these guys. Yeah, right here. Okay, so here's the highlighted section of the article. Let me blow it up so you can see it. Okay, I just cut that out so you can see it, took it exactly. They do some definitions, and this is a coordinating national response to electromagnetic pulses, and I believe this was March of this year. Okay, yeah. Well, at least he wrote the article in March, so I think it may have happened as early as January when they announced it. Okay, so there's evidence that the government knows the sun's about to act up, and they're going to blame it on a terrorist from North Korea with a satellite that's in low Earth orbit over the United States. It could drop a rod of God on you and cause it. Okay, well, they could do that too, but this is the real reason right here, in my opinion. We're witnessing a flurry of activity involving deep underground military bases now stocked full of China-produced Walmart goods, while on the surface of the planet, the most powerful countries are engaged in resource theft without shame, right in the light of day. They include petroleum, water, specialty metals, and anything else deemed necessary to establish continuity of government when emerging from the underground cities to see the Earth's surface, to see if the Earth's surface can once again be occupied and the slaves put back to work under the guises of a new world order. Cataclysm Evidence Item 5 discusses a book written by Chan Thomas entitled Adam and Eve. Many of you probably heard about it, probably not read it. This book ended up classified by the CIA, which appears to cover up the idea that cyclical cataclysms visit the Earth, and they don't want that known among the masses. You can download this partial copy online. I'll leave a link to the description and show you the declassified version of the PDF I have. There's a lot of markup on it, okay? So let's take a look at that real quick. Let me make it a little bit smaller so you can read it. You can see this is called The Adam and Eve Story by Chan Thomas. I believe it came out, it was published in the 60s or 70s. I can't remember when this thing was published. Okay, I'll have to look at it. Okay. Anyway, he goes through and basically gives a discussion of this. I don't know, he uses some pretty significant language and talks about all kinds of things going on in the New World Order and control of information, and then he launches into basically there's cataclysm cycles, the great floods, and blah, 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 the whole thing. And it's not a very long read, so if you want to read it yourself, I encourage you, but you can see when we get, he talks about like Noah 65 years ago, like Adam and Eve 11,005 years ago, this too will come to pass. Anyway, so this one, I'll give you a link of where I found it, and you can read through it as well. And you can see he starts describing when the poles flip, what happens with the oceans, wiping everything out. Okay, this is what this is. All right, let's just go right here. Antarctica and Greenland. I picked Greenland because Trump wants to buy the place. With their ice caps now rotate around the Earth in the torrid zone, that means they're near the equator, and the fury of wind and inundation marches on for 6 days and nights. During the 6th day, the ocean starts to settle in their new homes, running off the high grounds. Okay, he gives you a lot of terrible visuals with the oceans overflowing all the land masses. But so here's Antarctica and Greenland. How interesting is that they both end up at the torrid zones, just like I said in the article. Okay, so let's go back. I encourage you guys to read this. It's pretty fanciful though. Okay, that leaves us with this uneasy knowledge that the sun's dynamo is being altered by some force, as we see in the headlines with the poles moving. Is it easily explained by referring to the Mayan calendar cycle as well as the evidence provided by Diehold Foundation and the holy science gurus like Babaji, more interested in consciousness cycles versus slave system preservation methods? Okay, something is happening right before our eyes which indicates a pole shift might be in progress. The northern positive pole is changing and affecting missile trajectory times and aviation magnetometers alike. Once the average magnetic flux of the Earth as measured on the surface diminishes to a certain threshold, known to be about 20 microteslas according to Doug Vogt and others, that a polar migration can start, leading to a magnetic pole flip. It could also happen suddenly if the sun's nova sending out radiation in all directions causes it in an instant. The average magnetic flux measurements are hard to come by for the average person in the public because they're controlled by government scientists. The bottom line is that the Earth's rotation velocity changes as a result of the magnetosphere impacts, and the result has been about 36 seconds slower rotation for our Earth in the last 100 years. So our Earth's rotation is slowed down by 36 seconds per year. That change rate is now accelerating as evidenced by the moving poles. When will the threshold average magnetic flux be reached? That's the 20 microteslas. We are at approximately 24 microteslas according to Doug Vogt, which is very close. Could CERN mess with that number and make it happen without the solar micronova happening? It probably can, because it can affect the entire Earth's magnetic flux. Or will the sun micronova in an instant, making the slow motion polar flip a moot point as a powerful solar EMP reboots Earth's dynamo once again in synchronization with divine celestial orbital cycles? Okay? This report's not intended to cause panic or fear, but to recognize the actual cycles that exist on this slave planet that would lead advanced alien colonizers like the Anunnaki, the Draco, and their gopher race of greys to live underground and treat the surface of the planet as a temporary gig. Look at all the civilizations that have been destroyed, that have been left as they are. It took a lot of effort to build those, and they've not been rebuilt. And no one has built anything equivalent since. Knowing the cataclysm cycles, the alien colonizers would not build permanent surface edifices, rather opt for long-term, deep underground military bases that can survive the full force of a solar micronova. Would you want to live underground as a species for more than 1,000 years? Actually, it turned out to be 1,920 years, according to how long you'd be in the galactic equator. I don't know. Depends on the conditions, I guess. The good news is that when we reach the galactic equator, our sun progressively builds to this micronova threshold as galactic equatorial debris and gas comes in close proximity with our sun. It's like pouring fuel on a fire. The resulting change in solar quantization alters all life, including human life, as you saw in the Holy Science book, okay? The quanta shift could potentially change our molecular density and blast us as a species into a new dimension in our energetic light bodies. Some would call that an ascension event. Nothing to fear at all as we evolve from our material experience back to our more permanent, formless energy form. What do you say? During World War II, we discovered the Thule Society that Hitler held at close advisor range. Many of you maybe didn't know that. Turns out that the Germans built a military base with submarine facilities on Greenland, in addition to Antarctica, and this one was named Thule, or Thule. The United States is now using the base similar to the German submarine base located at the Antarctic. President Trump was recently cited in the headlines offering to buy Greenland, which seems absurd to most. The truth is that once cataclysm ensues, it's possible the poles will break off their ice caps, which eventually migrate toward the equator, melting the ice and making the thawed terrain very attractive for a continuity of New World Order government in the event their occupied land ends up in the new sun belt near the equator. Is that why Russia has staked out the northern polar region, leaving only Denmark's controlled Greenland as the polar boardwalk property still on the monopoly board that Russia does not control? Will Denmark sell Greenland to the USA? If so, do they take petrodollars, gold, or only accept tickets to participate in the planned or existing deep underground military base at Thule? Here's an article discussing the purchase plan. Let's take a look. Oh my word, okay. So here it is. It just happened, what was the date on this article? It's just the other day. Anyway, he talks about why is he wanting to buy, oh, is it about resources, is it about that? Anyway, you can read it yourself, but now that you've seen the evidence from Chan Thomas in Adam and Eve and the Holy Science and others, it's pretty clear that the Antarctic and Greenland are prime real estate when this happens. So are we getting close? Perhaps. Folks, hear me on this, and don't let the reality scare you into saving your sorry meat modems for more enslaved fun in the simulator. Forget about running to the hills or buying an old missile silo to survive the coming cataclysm. I recommend you instead recognize the truth that our material experience is an illusion. Because you are an immortal being having a transitory meat modem experience with engine death, one way or another for us all. Thus, in the immortal words of Zane, the headmaster of the Atlantean monastery from the book The Lost Teachings of Atlantis, to his student John Peniel, find universal consciousness first, wherever you are, running away from coming calamity to save your selfish avatar flesh so it can continue sleeping in the sensory stimulating matrix as a slave is a waste of time. Find universal consciousness here and now, wherever you are. and the headline news fear-mongering media will have little effect on you, as you serve those around you with the love and steadfastness instilled in us all by the Creator of all, as stated in Thoth's incredible Emerald Tablets, which are included in full along with my analysis in Chapter 5 of my book, The Seventh Planet Mercury Rising. Thanks for hanging with me on this complex topic presented in summary. Links to some helpful documents and videos are provided in the description. This has been episode 2 of Headlines with a Brain, hosted by Gerald Clark. Support our sponsors at Seventh Planet Broadcasting, GravityBodyAcademy.com, and ArtisticVegan.com. See you all next time.
Yeah, give us the gold, lady, and no one gets hurt.
I am down to my last bottle of Starfire Gold, and by no means is this riffraff gonna take mine. I love this product. Thanks for fixing me up with the good stuff. ArtisticVegan.com and GeraldClark77.